From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine on this Thursday. It's good to have you with us as always. And as you know, yesterday, many of you regular viewers, we did Open Phones Wednesday. Today, we're going to be zeroing in on the topic of guns, gun safety, gun violence, gun rights, and all of that. And much of it hung on the hook of that tragedy that happened on Monday where the little 11-year-old was shot and killed by her father. What appears to have been an accident. The father, of course, right now is charged with reckless homicide, Timothy Batts. And as that story continues to evolve and we learn more about that, it just brings the focus again into gun safety and keeping the guns out of the hands of folks who shouldn't have them and all of that, and some of the larger issues here as well as we continue to hear the discussion at the national stage and the presidential election, gun rights and all of that. And we all know here in the state of Tennessee, Second Amendment is very, very important to so many of us who live here, and so there's a balance between your right to own a weapon and safety and how that shakes out, and everyone has a different line. So we're going to get into that this morning. If you'd like to join in the conversation, 737-7587. Our guest is Beth Joslyn Roth. Not related to David Lee Roth of Van Halen fame, I assume. But anyway, Beth, nice to have you on. She's Executive Director and Policy Director for Safe Project Tennessee, right?
Safe Tennessee
I'm sorry,
Project.
Safe Tennessee Project.
That's
Flip-flop this. Which, let me just say, it's a relatively new organization, started in January of 2015. A grassroots organization, it says here on the description, dedicated to addressing the epidemic of gun-related injuries and gun violence in Tennessee. We should say that you're nonpartisan. We should say that your organization supports the Second Amendment, and that we should say you're not advocating banning guns in any way.
Correct.
What is it then? The focus is just finding ways to allow people to responsibly own weapons, but at the same time reducing some of the dangerous incidents that occur?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're just primarily looking to educate people about gun safety and the importance of practicing gun safety if you are a gun owner, as well as looking at policies and gun law reform that could reduce the number of lives lost to bullets every year.
What did you think when you heard the story on Monday with little Tamia?
It was heartbreaking. I have an 11-year-old daughter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she just started sixth grade, just like Tamia had just started sixth grade. It's horrible. This little girl who, by all accounts, was full of life and a sweet little girl. Her life was taken in just a matter of a minute, and it's unfortunate, and it's yet another one of these unfortunate tragedies that we see in our state.
And so when you look at the gun violence we're talking about, we know now that her father, Timothy Batts, is incarcerated, charged with reckless homicide. He's a convicted felon in possession of a weapon. Right there's a crime unto itself.
Right.
But I think it's pretty much acknowledged by investigators and him that he did not mean to kill his daughter. He did not mean to kill his daughter, and I can imagine how devastated he is right now. But he shouldn't have had this weapon. And the way the circumstances played out, let's just assume for a moment he was not a felon and he legally owned this weapon, and this still went down.
Right.
And unfortunately, we see that happening. How do you prevent it? I mean, you have an individual who maybe thinks someone's broken into his home or is startled. As ridiculous as, frankly, I think this scenario played out. It was middle of the afternoon. You knew she's coming home from school. What are you thinking? But how do you address these types of incidents? They happen, and they're awful.
Well, there was an incident, I think it was about a year ago, where a man accidentally shot his, I don't remember if it was his wife or girlfriend. She had actually left to take her kid to school, and he thought she was going to work, and he had gone back to bed, and she had forgotten something and went back home to pick it up, and he heard somebody in the house and shot her and killed her. And when it comes to discussing how to prevent that kind of thing, that really just sort of speaks to someone's mentality. There's sort of this idea of shoot first and ask questions later, and unfortunately sometimes that leads to tragedy. I think any of us can understand the sensation of being startled and being fearful that maybe someone was breaking into your home. If you have a weapon, if you have a firearm and you grab that firearm, before you pull the trigger, you would think that you would want to confirm that the person that you're aiming the gun at is in fact an intruder and not someone that you know. You know, we actually see these kind of scenarios across the country where people, shoot somebody who's coming home. Their son's coming home late from being out, or a relative that's staying with them comes in, and so I would just say that anybody who's going to keep a gun at home for self-protection, self-defense, just needs to be mindful of confirming who they're pointing the gun
and
at.
that's the trick, because you are absolutely right. I'm in the news business, and I've covered both types of stories, but I've covered far more stories like the situation with Tamia, where there is someone with a gun, and many folks, many of you have guns at home because you feel you need that security, and that's perfectly fine.
Sure.
But I've done more cases where the gun owner has shot a loved one. Right. By mistake, than cases where a gun owner has shot an actual crook breaking into their home. Right. Okay, and to me, it's I don't know, do guns, if you're not properly trained or in the right situation, give you a false sense of security? I mean, you have that gun there to protect yourself, and I understand it. You go to bed at night, and then you end up shooting your daughter. Right. Come on. And a lot of people say, well, it's him that shot the daughter, not the gun. But I'm like, if he had had a can of mace under there, not that would be as effective, a baseball bat or a butter knife. Right. She would have been stabbed or swatted in the head with a bat or sprayed with mace and probably still alive. The fact that he had a gun, she's dead.
Well, the reality is, and this is, something people don't always want to discuss, but if you actually have a gun in your home, there is a far greater chance that that gun will be used to injure or kill someone that you care about that lives in that home than there is that you would ever use that gun to shoot an intruder. That's a statistical fact. That does not mean, however, that you should not be able to have a gun in your home. That's absolutely your right. I support that right. My position would just be, if you're going to make that choice, then you have to be very mindful of the responsibility that goes along with having that gun, and you have to be aware of the fact that if you have that gun in your home, there is a very high likelihood that someone in that home that you care about could be harmed by it, whether it's by you shooting them accidentally or whether it's by them obtaining access to the gun and shooting themselves with it in the case of children.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the statistics your organization kind of provided here. Tennessee's 9th in the nation for death by firearm, 9th in the nation for accidental shooting, so near the top, 6th in the nation for women murdered by men, most often with a gun, 3rd in the country for shootings in or near a school, college, or university. And of course, about 600 Tennesseans commit suicide with a gun each year, about 50 per month. And if they didn't have a gun, they might find some other way to do it. But yeah, I can see why this is something, to address. The guns and the Second Amendment aren't going. And anyone who tells you that any politician, Hillary Clinton, President Obama, anyone that wants to be a politician says they want to take your gun rights away, they're not going to be elected.
Well, and to be fair, neither of them have ever said that they want to take your guns away.
None of them ever have. It becomes political. But Second Amendment's here to stay.
Sure.
And so the point is just making it as safe as possible, and that's what you're after.
That's exactly what we're after. There's this idea that people have that this is such a polarizing issue that you either support some type of full-scale confiscation of guns, banning of guns, taking away the Second Amendment, or over here that everybody should be able to carry a semi-automatic assault rifle around with them wherever they go. Right? Those are sort of the extremes, and the reality is, the vast majority of Americans, and really even the vast majority of Tennesseans, are somewhere in the middle on this issue.
That's me.
What we see, nationally is around, I think the last statistic I saw, around 90 to 92% of Americans support the idea of expanding background checks to all gun sales. And what we even see in Tennessee, according to polling that's been done by MTSU and Vanderbilt, is around 83 to 84% of Tennesseans support expanding background checks to all gun sales. So, there is common ground out there. I think, anyone on either side of the issue can agree that there are too many people that are shot and killed in our country. There are too many people shot and killed in our state. We can all agree that that's a fact. And where we come from on the issue is trying to look for evidence-based ways to actually reduce the number of people that are shot, injured, and killed in our country, and specifically here in Tennessee.
Yeah, we'll talk more when we come back from the break about some of the policies you support. I mean, you just mentioned one of them in terms of, background checks.
Right.
And we'll take some phone calls. Listen, we'll take a break. We've got some calls already coming in. We've got some lines open. Your thoughts, questions, comments along those lines, 737-7587. Back with more right after this. Stay with us.